Good morning, Church of Cane Bay. My name is Joel. I'm one of the pastors here. If we haven't met, I would love the opportunity to get to do that maybe afterwards. But I'm thankful that you're here and grateful to be able to dig into God's Word together this morning. Before we get there, though, I do have something I want to mention to you, and that is that we have now sign-ups for student camp and kids camp this summer. So our students are going to be going to Student Life Camp July 15th through the 19th. That's for 7th through 12th grade. This is a new camp for our students. It's a new place, and we're excited about this. This is a different opportunity to kind of get away and spend some time connecting with God, connecting with leaders. It's just going to be a wonderful time. So if you have a student, I encourage you, get them connected to this. And also Kids Camp, our kids are going to Kids Salt July 8th through the 11th at Charleston Southern. It's going to be a great time. That's rising 4th grade through rising 6th grade. And so we're excited about that too. I'll say this about both of these. We've got a QR code, I think, on the next one. You can scan that, and it'll take you to registrations for both camps where you can get your kids signed up, your kids and your students. There is an early bird offer on both of these camps. And so I believe that if you sign up and register before March 1st, you get a cheaper rate, a discounted rate for camp. And so this is a good moment and a good opportunity. You can scan that and take care of that. But camp's going to be great this year. I hope that your students and your kids will have just a great time connecting them with that. All right, we're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 5. If you've got your Bibles, Deuteronomy 5. If you have the Bible app, you can touch the little 3 lines thing and then go to events and find Church of Cane Bay, and our notes will be there, or just look up Deuteronomy 5 as well. But we're continuing a series Pastor Will kicked off last week called Practicing the Way Sabbath, where we're digging into this whole thing of Sabbath. What is Sabbath? What's it all about? What's the goal? Last week, Pastor Will talked about stopping. That sometimes we just need to stop. We need to figure out how to stop. But there's a lot more to Sabbath than just stopping. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be digging into, once we stop, what do we do? What does Sabbath look like? And today we're going to be looking at the idea of rest. We're going to be talking about rest, which I'm excited to dig into. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't rest well. Any of you guys with me? You don't rest well? There's a lot of hands not up. I'm surprised you're either too shy or you're too tired because you don't rest well. I don't know what it is, but I don't rest well. I'll work a long day at work and come home, and you know what I'll do? Work some more. That's the American way, right? We leave work, we go home, we work more. Whether it's cleaning up the kitchen, doing something in the yard, working on a project, working on work while I'm at home. I tend to do this. My kids will come and say, "Dad, will you play with me? Dad, can we do this?" And sadly, you know what? I feel so often too busy to be able to stop and connect with my kids. I feel like whatever I'm doing at the moment is too urgent for me to set it aside and spend some time with them. I don't know what has happened to us to make us feel like sometimes non-urgent things are urgent, but we live in this world. Another area I struggle in is naps. How many of you guys are nappers? Anybody? All right, that's more than the first service. Congratulations, it's good. I tried to think this week about the last time I took a nap, and I think the last nap that I took was about 2 years ago. I was actually on a sabbatical that our church gifted to me, which was an incredible gift, and I went camping by myself for a week. I was out completely alone, and one day I was laying in the hammock, reading a book, and I fell asleep. And it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my entire life. But yet, I can't get myself to take a nap. It feels like a waste of time. There's too many things to do, too much urgency to life. I can't make it happen. I used to take a nap when my kids were young, because when your kids are young and your kids need to take a nap, it feels very urgent for your kids to take a nap. And so I would make a deal with them on Sundays. If they took a nap on Sunday afternoons, they'd go to their bedroom. They were in the same room. Their beds were on either side. And I would lay on the floor in the middle and fall asleep on the floor just to get them to fall asleep in their beds. But it was honestly not that bad. It was an incredible rhythm that I had kind of built into life at that point. But then they stopped taking naps and I stopped taking naps. And it's gone. If I had to pick, if somebody asked me, if you had a day just to yourself, you can do whatever you want, you don't have to worry about anything else, put everything else aside, I think I would go with that idea of a book and a nap. But I never do that. It never feels that important. Everything else feels too urgent to me in the moment. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Why do these non-important things seem so urgent to us? And I think the answer is that we have too many desires. There's too many things we want to run after, too many things that we want to achieve, too many things that we want to gain in life. And so we just feel stuck, always going, always moving, and always doing things. The writer of Ecclesiastes in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 8 says this: "The eye is not satisfied with seeing." That the thing that the eye was created to do, doesn't seem to be enough for the eye. The eye wants to do more, wants to be able to do more. A more modern day philosophy of this was quoted in a song that said one time, "I can't get no satisfaction." Thomas Aquinas was an Italian priest he was also a philosopher. And one day somebody came and asked him the question, "Hey Thomas, what do you think it would take to satisfy the desire of man?" Now that's a huge question, right? What do you think it would take to satisfy the desire of man? And you know what he said? Everything. It would take everything for us to be satisfied. We would have to experience everything to its fullest, everyone in the world to its fullest, for us to gain some sense of satisfaction. We live in a culture and a world of utter restlessness, where we're constantly moving, we're constantly going after something, chasing after something. And our culture manipulates the sense of restlessness in us by constantly throwing advertisements in front of our face and saying, here's another thing that you have to have, another thing that you have to work hard to gain and run after. And so our culture has monetized our restlessness, literally taking what we have away from us, trying to make us feel like we need to gain something that they have. Did you know that the average American sees about 4,000 advertisements a day? 4,000 ads a day. It's like the Bugs Bunny cartoon that I watched when I was a kid, where they would put a carrot hanging down from a stick, and it's like he's always going, trying to get that one thing and can never get to it. But the problem with our culture today is there's not just one carrot, there's 4,000 of them a day. And we're always chasing and always running after something, trying to get hold of it. And if we actually get one, we feel great for a moment, but then we look around and there's 3,999 more carrots. And we're like, what do we do? Well, we keep going and we keep working and we keep moving, and all this time, it's like a huge game of whack-a-mole where we finally hit the stupid thing and then another one pops up, and we have no idea how to get our ultimate satisfaction. How do we stop? And the good news for us is that God designed a rhythm for us to save us from ourselves. And it's called Sabbath. It's called rest. The Hebrew word for Sabbath, Shabbat, is more than just sleeping or a nap or taking a day off. It's this kind of full, holistic sense of rest that we rest from work, but we rest from all work, our to-do lists and our chores. We're resting constantly. We're finding some way to find a sense of rest in a moment. Neuroscientists tell us this, that when you're at home and you think about work, that it stimulates the same stress chemicals in your brain that you have when you're at work, working on work. And the hard thing for so many of us is that those chemicals are working in our minds almost 24 hours a day, that we can't stop. We can't stop feeling that stress or that anxiety. We can't push those things off to the side and find a place where we can actually find some peace and find some rest, because the world is constantly coming in on us and making us feel like we can't do it. We can't get enough. But God designed Sabbath as a way for us to find a way to push our wants, to push our worry aside and rest in Him, to push away the carrots of consumerism and achievement and just seek after Him. So in Deuteronomy 5, we're going to dig into today, we're going to get a little insight into this. And you may not know this, but the Ten Commandments were actually recorded more than once in the Old Testament. Last week, Pastor Will talked about Exodus chapter 20, which is when Israel kind of receives the Ten Commandments for the first time, and they're hearing them, they take them in. They, at that point, had just left slavery in Egypt, and they're beginning their journey. But here in Deuteronomy 5 is about 40 years later, so 40 years down the road. They're close to the edge of the Jordan. The promised land is in sight, and God wants to remind them of some things. This is a new generation of God's people who are hearing this, and so it's important that they do. And so we're kind of going to compare and contrast Exodus 20 with Deuteronomy 5. And so before we get into Deuteronomy 5, I'm going to read Exodus 20, the Sabbath command for you. You don't have to look it up. It's going to be on the screen. But listen to this, and then we'll take a look at Deuteronomy 5. So Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11 says this: "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Last week we learned that this command about the Sabbath is the longest command of the Ten Commandments. It's almost like God felt like it was important, because it is really important. And as we get to Deuteronomy 5, there's a couple of kind of key differences that are given that I want us to focus in on this morning. So let's read in Deuteronomy 5, and we're going to be looking at verses 12 through 15. This is the command for the Sabbath that's there. Here's what it says, verse 12. "Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." So what's different here? Well, there's a couple of key things I want us to note. And the first one is this: the Sabbath is to be observed. The Sabbath is to be observed. This is the first difference that we see, and it's literally the first word in the commandment. Exodus 20 says, "Remember the Sabbath." And here in Deuteronomy 5, "Observe the Sabbath." So what's being communicated is not just that the Sabbath is something that we look back on or think about or contemplate. It's not just stopping, but the Sabbath is actually doing something. Resting is an active thing that we do. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive. Doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of rest or the Sabbath if it means that I have to do something? Well, I think the answer is no for a couple of reasons, and they're this. One, Sabbath takes planning. Sabbath takes planning. Sabbath's not just going to happen. You're not just going to accidentally Sabbath in your life. God gives us a really specific model. Work for 6 days, rest on the seventh. Sabbath requires a calendar. In fact, that's what God laid out for us, a week. And he designed a week around this idea of Sabbath. I think that that's really important for us because honestly, if you want to rest, if you want to take a nap, you should put it on your calendar. That sounds strange. But if you want to read a book, put it on your calendar. If you want to go for a walk, put it on your calendar. If you want to spend time with God every day in his word and in prayer, put it on your calendar. If you don't do that, something that's more urgent is going to creep in and rob you of your rest. We have got to block out the things that are most important. But instead, it's the unimportant stuff that fills the pages of our calendars. And all of the really important stuff gets pushed out and pushed to the side. And we get robbed of the things that we actually need to be spending time in because of what fills the pages of our calendars. We've got to plan for Sabbath, or you're not going to do it. I don't know how many times I've said, well, next week's going to be better, or I think things are going to slow down. Guys, the reality is, it's not going to slow down. You have to intentionally slow down in order to find rest. Sabbath takes planning. Number 2, Sabbath is special. Sabbath is special. Sabbath in Scripture is a holy day that God set aside as something to be guarded and protected and remembered. Now that term, holy day, has been taken by our culture and translated into this other term called holiday. And holidays are something that typically we do protect, we guard. We're off of work for many of them. And we observe these things. We take them seriously. You don't accidentally end up in front of a Christmas tree on Christmas morning. It doesn't happen, right? You have to actually decorate. You plan for this thing. You plan meal prep. You wrap presents and gifts. All these things we do so that we can have these moments together as a family that we hope our families are going to remember. These moments that are going to stick with us and last for a long time. It takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of work to treat this day like a special day. And what if I told you that I think God's design and intention was for us to do the same thing with Sabbath? That it is a holiday or a holy day that we set aside for God, that we plan for, that we prepare for, that when we get to it, we've done all of these things to make it feel like a special day that we have to rest and to connect with God. Sabbath is special. And we need to start treating it like that. So the Sabbath is to be observed, not just remembered, but observed. We have to prepare. We have to do something for it. And then number 2, the Sabbath is about resistance. The Sabbath is about resistance. Now, Exodus 20 ends with God modeling Sabbath for us. 6 days you work, 1 day, the 7th day you rest. But here, it's different. We don't see that picture, that image, and it's not because it's not important. It does. But instead, look at what verse 15 says in Deuteronomy 5. It says this, "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath holy." I think sometimes we just forget that this whole thing is a command, that God is telling you to rest. He's telling you to guard and protect this day, that it's important, that it matters. We just forget the fact that it's one of the 10 commandments and the longest of the 10 commandments. But it's important. It matters, and it's about resistance. So here God tells them, listen, you were slaves, and with my mighty hand and outstretched arm, I rescued you out of it. It's the same command to rest, the same command about Sabbath, but the reason that's given is a different reason. We were slaves. We're not slaves anymore. So stop living like one. Live differently. What we get in Exodus is about rhythm. 6 days, one day you rest. But in Deuteronomy, this command is about resistance. That we are so entwined in a culture that is crushing us and killing us, and we have got to resist to find rest. Before this series, we were doing a series in Exodus, and we talked a lot about Israel in slavery in Egypt and how they worked and toiled, and Pharaoh for them in that series. Like, he was always wanting more work, harder work from them. It was a big deal for Pharaoh to let go of God's people because it was on their backs that he ultimately sat in a nice cushy chair every single day and ruled over the nation. He needed them to be slaves. He needed someone to work so that he wouldn't have to. And God's people were in slavery to him. And in a system like that, you have to have slaves. For Pharaoh to be able to be who he was, he had to lord over and rule over and crush someone. And it was God's people who he did that to. And to Pharaoh, the only value to the people of Israel was in what they could produce. That they would work hard and work hard and work hard and work hard until they die. That was their value. But in God's kingdom, our value is completely different. Our value isn't in what we do, what we produce, but in who God has made us to be. And we've been set free from slavery. We are no longer slaves, but yet so many of us are living like we still are, enslaved to the kingdom of this world and what this world tells us is important and valuable. And we forget that God, our King, isn't like Pharaoh. He's not telling us to work harder, but instead he's commanding us to rest because he loves us. And he wants what's best for us. He's not a cruel king. He is a God of love. So how can we resist? What are we resisting against? I think there's two main things that we need to resist against, two ideas. And one is this: the idea that we work hard. Guys, we are hard workers in America. We are. In America, the average American person works 137 more hours per year than the Japanese, 260 more hours a year than England, 499 more hours a year than the French. I don't know what that says about the French, but hear me. More than any other nation, we are the hardest workers. Americans work harder than anyone else in the world. Why? Why? It has to be because of the things that we want to achieve and the stuff that we want to gain. That is what America is built on today. We work so hard. In the 1960s, we created these labor-saving devices, things like dishwashers, central heat, computers came along, and we were promised when these things were made, hey, these are going to allow you more time to rest. Analysts said in the next decade, you are going to America, you're only going to have to work about 20 to 30 hours a week because of these devices. But guess what's actually happened? We work even harder. Our leisure time from the 1950s to now is down 37%. We are slaves to our work, and we don't even know what to do about it. So we work hard, and we need to resist against that. But also, too, we have more. We have more than anyone else. We've been chasing those carrots. We're addicted to our stuff. We're addicted to the things that we have. I heard someone tell me this week that kind of addiction to stuff is voluntary slavery. That you are basically saying, these things are so important that I will be enslaved to achieving them, whatever it costs. The cost of my family, the cost of my time, whatever it is, it doesn't matter because this stuff, these carrots, they're important. We have 2 to 3 times more goods than we did in the 1950s. Our homes are 3 times larger, and they're filled with 2 times as many things. Did you know this? That there are 2.3 billion feet of self-storage in America. 2.3 billion feet of self-storage in America. Listen to this. You could take every American, including children, babies, whatever, every American, and put them inside a storage unit in the United States of America, and every person would have 7.3 square feet around them. We have people living on the streets. Guys, what are we doing? We have more than we need. We have more than enough. And we're more unhappy than we've ever been before. It's not working. This world is telling you lies. It's feeding me lies about how we can be happy, how we can be satisfied. Something's got to change. We've got to resist so we can rest. We have to stop living like slaves in Egypt. And hear me, I'm not saying that you shouldn't work. You should. Work is good. God told us, work 6 days, rest 1. And most of us struggle in one of those areas, but some of us probably struggle more with the work thing. And that's called laziness. And the Bible actually has a lot to say about laziness. Laziness and rest are not the same thing. And I think a lot of us are afraid to rest because maybe it'll make people think that we're lazy. But you actually, to work well, need rest. God created this beautiful balance for you of working hard and then resting well. But a lot of us are struggling to work hard, and some of us are struggling to rest well. We don't know how to get it right. And because of that, we have anxiety and stress that's overcoming our lives because we can't figure it out. Rest and laziness are completely different. Listen, you can be lazy and never actually rest because you don't have anything to rest from. We need to work and we need to rest. But the balance of that is so important. God modeled it. He told us. He gave it to Adam and Eve. You can't have one without the other. You need work to have rest, and you need rest to work well. And work is a good thing, but we have to remember it's not the most important thing. Now, it's the thing that gets us what this world tells us is important: money, status, and power. But it's not the most important thing. Stuff is also a good thing. We need stuff to live. You need food so that you can survive. These things are important. And so we need to work so we can gain what we need to live. But let's be honest, we have more than enough stuff. Way more than enough stuff. Most of us could not buy anything for the next month and still be okay. Even food. Our pantries are like stuffed with food. We don't need more things. Sabbath is a way for us to break our addiction to our work and our stuff, for us to finally draw some lines and say, you know what, enough is enough. I'm not going to cross this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't need to work more hours. I don't need to gain more money. I don't need the new car. I don't need the bigger house. I'm not going to be a slave to this anymore. Is the carrot really necessary? Do I really have to have this? We've got to get to the point where we're not living in the kingdom of this world anymore in slavery, and remember that we are part of a new kingdom and that we have a new king. It's not going to be easy. There's resistance to this that we're going to feel all across. The world is going to tell us that we're dumb. It takes guts to go against the flow of where everyone else in culture is going. You're going to look weird to drive a car that's 10 years old. You're going to look weird to be the person who's not going after the promotion at work that's going to cost you even more time with your family. You're going to look weird to be the person who doesn't carry a smartphone around all the time and you're addicted to it and stuck to it. You're going to be weird to be a person who puts it in a drawer for 24 hours and turns it off, but just maybe those are the things we need to do but we're also going to feel resistance inside of us. Because Egypt's not just around us, it's in us. Because the desires of our fallen heart are going to be tugging on us. Selfishness, pride, envy, discontentment, making us feel like we need more. There's got to be more. This can't be enough. I don't know why we feel like we're losing when we rest. We feel like it's a waste. But what if I actually told you that maybe you're actually gaining? Maybe you're gaining by resting. Going after less doesn't lead to less. It actually leads to more. Do you know what the most profitable fast food chain in America is? Chick-fil-A. The most profitable fast food chain in America is Chick-fil-A. Do you know what Chick-fil-A does that pretty much every other fast food chain doesn't do? They're closed on Sundays. This makes no sense in the context of our world, that there could be a business, like a fast food restaurant, that takes one day a week off of work, basically where they said, we're casting aside a seventh of our total profits so that our people can rest. How in the world can that business be the most profitable business in America? And I would tell you, it's because they're doing it the way God designed it to be. And yet we feel like, I just can't rest. I can't do it. I'm going to lose. It's going to be a waste. Maybe we're actually better when we rest. How do we rest? What do we do? How do we make it happen? Here's a few ideas. Number one, sleep. Pastor Will talked to us last week about how we're way behind on our sleep. Years ago, most people were getting 10 to 11 hours of sleep a night. We're lucky these days if we get 6. Guys, we need to sleep. It seems like a waste of time, but it's not a waste of time at all. Science will tell you, if you get your 8 hours of sleep a night, guess what? You're going to be better. You're going to be better emotionally. You're going to be better relationally. You're going to be better physically. You're going to be better financially. And God says you're going to be better spiritually. We know this to be true, but yet it still feels like a waste of time. Why? What is the world teaching us that we feel like this is true? Some of us need to leave here today, eat lunch with our families, go home, and take a nap for the glory of God. I'm giving you permission today to take a nap. Do not judge the other person in your house when they take a nap today. They need it. We all need it. I am going to try and take a nap today. It's going to be very difficult, but I'm going to try and do it because I need it and you need it. We need sleep, and God is glorified when we do, when we need it. All right, so sleep. Number 2, set aside unimportant stuff. We could argue about what's unimportant, but we're just talking about the things that aren't the most important. Make the most important things a priority and set the other stuff aside. Your work, your phone, your social media. Do you have a time where you put that stuff to the side and you don't let it rob you of your time and your attention? iPhones have this great thing called Focus where you can turn off notifications for a day or certain hours or whatever it is. But what if you just turned off the phone, put it in a drawer, didn't pay any attention to it for 24 hours? That stresses me out. I'm sure it does you too, but maybe that's best for us. Maybe that's what we should be doing. How do we leave our work at work and not bring it home? What can we do to create a life in a world where we're able to do that? So sleep, set unimportant stuff aside. Number 3, do opposites. If you're struggling to let go of stuff, do the opposite of that thing. Go somewhere where you can't do that thing. Go somewhere where you can't work. Go somewhere where your phone doesn't work. Clear your mind. Play with your kids. Play fetch with your dog. Go fishing. Go to the park. I don't know what it is, but do something. Put yourself in an environment where you are forced to rest emotionally. It's important, and we need to sometimes do opposites. Number 4, draw close to what's important. Remember, Sabbath is a holy day. When we do holidays are a moment and an opportunity for us to connect with the people in our lives that we're closest to, that matter the most. And the Sabbath should be no different. The Sabbath should be a moment and an opportunity for us to wrap our arms around the people that we love, to rest together, to play together, to connect with God together, and put the other stuff to the side. Sleep, set unimportant stuff aside, do opposites, draw close to what's important. And then lastly, number 5, draw close to Jesus. Draw close to the Lord of the Sabbath. It's in him that we find real and ultimate rest. And we can't ultimately rest apart from that. We need to connect with him. Have a time of family worship or devotion. Huddle together with your family. Soak through Scripture together. Read a Bible story. Pray together. Connect with God and find real rest in him. I don't know what your Sabbath needs to look like. Do you need to take a whole day and set it aside? Ideally, yes. I'm not sure how to do that with your life, with your family, and what you have going on. Even if you can just take a few hours to try and get started, then do that. Remember, you're not a slave anymore. You've been rescued, and not just from Egypt. But if you belong to Jesus, you've been rescued for something way greater than Egypt. Colossians 1:13 says, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. His kingdom is a new place and a different place, and a place where you can find rest. Jesus said in Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's not an obligation that should weigh you down. It's a gift that should bring you joy and lightness. It's a gift from God to you. And in it, you can find Jesus, who is the greatest gift of all. How are we going to resist the world to find rest in him? You may be here this morning and you've never met Jesus before. You've never experienced even the potential of rest that can be found in him. And if that's you, I want to challenge you to have a conversation with somebody about that. Later on in the service, I'll be in one of these corners. We'll have some people in these corners, and we would love the chance to talk with you and pray with you about how you can meet Jesus in a real way. But for all of us, guys, I want us to have a time where we can talk to God about Sabbath. I can't tell you what to do. I don't know your life. I don't know your rhythms. I don't know what would be best for you. But God knows. And this morning, I want us just to have a real conversation with him about what that would look like. Say, God, you know my life. You know the things that are the carrots hanging in front of me. You know the hours that I've been working. Lord, what do I need to give up so that I can find rest in you? So I'm going to invite you guys to stand up with me. And we're going to pray. I'm not going to pray over you or for you because I don't know what to pray for you. But you know what it is. And God knows what it is. And so I'm going to invite you to a time. We're going to bow our heads and close our eyes. You can stay where you are. You can come down to the altar. You can kneel where you are. Whatever you need to do to talk to God. I want to invite you right now just to have a conversation. I'm going to give you a minute or two to have a conversation with him and say, God, how do I rest? How do I Sabbath? What do I need to sacrifice? What do I need to give up? Help me find this time to live this way that you have created so that I can find ultimate joy and hope and peace and rest in you. So let's pray right now and ask God those things.